Okay, guys, we are back. In this video, we are talking all things hearing. We talked all about vision in the last couple of videos. This one is all about how we hear and how we understand our auditory world. So, yes, you will need to know the parts of the ear, uh, and we'll get into them in just a second. So, first, let's talk objectives here. So, we will be talking about the transduction of sound and comparing that to the transduction of sight because there's a lot of similar things here. Um, talk about the different ways that we understand how we hear, and we'll talk about hearing loss and how that affects us as we age. Um, Remember, transduction means converting sensory information, things from the outside world, into neural impulses. So, brief definition, which we'll cover more in a future video. So let's dive right into it. So, similar to light, the stimulus for sound is waves. We hear things that are in the air, they're traveling through the air as sound waves. Our ears pick them up, and then we hear them. That's pretty much how it works. And like our vision, sound is determined by wavelength and amplitude. Surprise, surprise. So, first, wavelength determines pitch. So, the longer a wavelength, the lower the pitch, or the lower the frequency, the lower the pitch. So, bass sounds, um, the deep notes that you hear, the bumping bass in the back of your trunk as you're blasting your music, those are all low frequencies. The high frequencies result into a high pitch. So that's, the treble side of things, if you will. It's the difference between a bass and a violin. Um, so wavelength determines pitch. Amplitude determines volume. Uh, a nice way to think about this, especially if you're a guitar player, or a vocalist or something. An amp, right? An amplifier, makes things louder. So when you plug your guitar into an amp, it makes it louder, right? It makes it so that you can hear. So amplitude amplifies. So the higher amplitude, the louder it is. The lower the amplitude, the quieter it is. So very similar to light. You know what I mean? So in light, wavelength is color. Uh, in sound waves, the wavelength is pitch, amplitude, brightness, or loudness. Since we talked about purity before, I figured we could talk about timbre, not timbre, timbre. It's the quality. So it's what allows you to determine the difference between someone playing the same notes on a zither or a harp or a guitar, right? Both are stringed instruments. If you think of, being able to determine the difference, if you don't know what a zither is, think of a violin. You can hear a difference between a violin and a guitar, even though they could be playing the exact same note, the exact same wavelength, the exact same amplitude, but they sound different. That's timbre, right? That's our ear's ability to determine differences in the quality of the sound. So let's talk about amplitudes. So the greater the amplitude, the greater of movement in your eardrum. That's actually how that works. And the bones in your ear, which are called ossicles, which we'll get to in just a second. And that translates into larger waves, literal waves, like think ocean waves, and the fluid in the cochlea, which is what allows us to hear. These waves bend the hair-like cells in the auditory nerve, leading to more perceived loudness. Loudness is measured in decibels. Each decibel is uh, a 10. Wow, a 10 decibel increase is actually 100 times louder. Okay, so it is like an exponential thing. So you can look at some intensity, right? Some loudness measured in decibels. Threshold of hearing is 0 decibels. If it's anything above 0, you can hear it. And then you can see it goes up pretty loud pretty quickly. Notice, 100 decibels. It's very loud, and that's your standard listening to music on your device. Um, and we actually have a couple things. Threshold of Pain, which is one easily the most or the best heavy metal band name that we'll ever talk about in AP Psych. The Threshold of Pain is it actually hurts your ear, like not like symbolically, like, oh, that's hurting your ears, like no, like it actually will cause you to wince in pain. um, and anything above that is dangerous. Actually, really anything above 100 decibels or higher, prolonged, is dangerous to your hearing. But we'll get to that later. And there are things that are so loud that they cause an instant perforation of your eardrum. So let's talk about that process of how we then hear things. So this will make a little bit what I was just saying a little bit make more sense. So sound gets funneled in from your ear. The lobe of your ear we actually call the pinna in psychology, and I guess anatomy too. But it's the lobe of your ear. It funnels sound in. It's shaped in a way to funnel sound into your auditory canal, which is if you put a Q-tip in your ear, that's what it is. That's where it goes, the auditory canal. That the vibrations of the air then vibrate the tympanic membrane, which is the fancy word for eardrum. If you need a way to remember that, a timpani is a type of drum. So maybe if you're a musician, that should help. If not, sorry. That's your eardrum, and that vibrates. That vibration then literally turns it into physical movement. That movement then pushes on the three bones, which we call the ossicles, that hammer the anvil and the stirrup, or the malleus, the incus, and the stepes. Yeah. Those then vibrate. They're actually little bones in your ear. They vibrate themselves because they're connected to the tympanic membrane. That then causes the oval window, which is the part that connects the ossicles to the cochlea, to also vibrate, and it amplifies that vibration, so that then the uh, cochlea, which is filled with fluid, then literally, like waves, like I was saying before, it's like an ocean wave comes kind of crashing through the cochlea. It is those waves as they pass through that then respond to. There's different parts in the cochlea. So if we unravel it like a unraveled snail or something like that, uh, as it unrolls, you can see that it kind of like just cycles all the way through. Um, and within the cochlea, within the walls within the cochlea, are all of these tiny little hair cells. So this is an actual image. Um, and those bend and kind of respond to the waves that are crashing through them. And when those waves bend these cells, they release neurotransmitters onto neurons at the beginning of the auditory nerve. This is connected to the auditory nerve, thereby converting the movement into neural activity. This is how we hear, gentlemen. Think about that. You've got fluid washing over these little hair cells, and that's what is enabling you to understand the words that are coming out of my mouth, to listen to your favorite music, to hear the birds or the sound of a car horn before you get, so you hit the brakes so you don't get in an accident. Guys, think of that. Think of how our brain can construct our auditory world just from fluid rushing over some hair. Maybe it's just me, but this blows me away more than sight does. I don't know why, but hearing is so just amazing to me how this all works. Now, we do know a couple things regarding the waves and how they respond. So high-pitched sounds, right? So again, think of wavelengths that then cause the tympanic membrane to vibrate. High-pitched means it's shorter wavelengths, they're faster. Disturb the hairs at the base of the cochlea the most. whereas the lower pitch sounds hit on the ends of the cochlea. So basically the internal of the snail, if you were to look at it. Neurons carrying that sound information are bundled, just like the optic nerve, into an auditory nerve, which then goes to the thalamus for processing, and then to the temporal lobes for our auditory processing areas. So that's a lot. If you need to go back and rewind, I'm not going to hold that against you, but I'm going to keep moving forward to talk about the two different ways that we hear, or that we believe that we hear, the theories of audition. So the first up is the place theory. This is a theory that says that there are specific parts of your cochlea that are basically designed to only hear certain pitches, and that those hair cells are waiting for that pitch to then, trigger a neural activity. I think of the place theory. Now, I play guitar, I play bass, so I think of this as like a fretboard on a musical instrument. If you know anything about stringed instruments, then you kind of know what a fretboard is. Um, so again, like it doesn't matter, you hit an open string, it plays the note, whatever it's tuned to, but then you press down at a certain point and it plays the same note every time. To me, that's the place theory of frequencies, right? That there's just a specific spot that is only triggered for a certain pitch. Now, the frequency theory says that it's actually the rate of the nerve impulses. So, as everything is translated into movement, right? So this is a little different. So as everything is translated into movement, the auditory nerve receives information that matches you can't see my hand, that matches the frequency of the tone, thus enabling us to hear its pitch. So in other words, right, imagine that there's a bell that's ringing at 100 hertz, which is a certain frequency, right? The action potential in our auditory nerves moving at a certain speed, that then tells us, oh, it's 100 hertz. But if it doubles, right, now the auditory nerve is sending more action potentials, which then result in us hearing a higher pitch. That's how that theory works. So again, place theory is that there's a specific spot on your cochlea that is only basically listening, if you want to think of it that way, for a certain pitch, and then says, "Ooh, that's a D sharp," or whatever. Frequency theory is that the vibrations itself cause faster action potentials, which then respond to the pitch appropriately. So the lower the pitch, the slower the action potential. The higher the pitch, the faster. Now, I know if you're going back to the bio unit saying, Mr. Vierlink, action potentials only operate at one speed. That's true. But if you think about all of the nerve cells that make up the auditory nerve, all of the axons, just like how all of the individual rods and cones in the eye make up the auditory or the optic nerve, all of the little hair cells come together to produce the auditory nerve. So it's just a big bundle of different nerve cells that are all firing at different rates. So that's what we mean. We don't mean there's not one neuron that is your auditory nerve. It's a collection. Hopefully that made sense. Let's talk about hearing loss, something that we should all be concerned about. Hearing loss, there's two types. There's one that's called conduction hearing loss, which is hearing loss that's caused damage to the mechanical system. So this is damage to the eardrums or the ossicles, which then causes, disruption in the cochlea. The cochlea essentially never hears things, even though the cochlea works perfectly well. The information never gets traveled to the cochlea for processing. It's called conduction. Sensory neural hearing loss is nerve deafness. That's where there's something wrong with the cochlea itself or to the auditory nerve itself. So the mechanics essentially are working fine. The eardrums, vibrating appropriately, the ossicles, all that stuff, but it's just the auditory nerve is not working. The cochlea is not working. The auditory nerve is not working, and it causes nerve deafness. But as we age, you might know this, people tend to lose their hearing as they age. It's a normal part of aging. And what they lose is not actually all hearing. What they tend to lose are frequencies. as you age, you lose the ability to hear high frequencies. So, we'll test this out in class, but maybe you've done this where a couple years ago, guys were doing this all the time, where they would play like a dog whistle kind of sound, and the teachers wouldn't hear it, or the older teachers wouldn't hear it, but all the guys in the class would cringe at the high pitched noise. Um, as you get older, you lose the ability to hear them, but you don't lose the ability to hear volume. So a lot of times, people as they age, and if they require hearing aids, they do not. It's not the volume necessarily. It's just picking up the amplitude, right? It's turning up the volume. It's turning up the volume for for the higher amplitude, or the higher pitches, so that they can hear them. Couple other things about hearing loss. Consistent exposure to high or to loud noises will result in early deafness. If you've ever listened to something, or been at a concert, or been in the car, or whatever, and you get out, you leave that thing, and your ears are ringing. That ringing in your ear is actually the dying of the hair cells in your cochlea. And if you've ever gotten like it's a small little like tinnitus, the high pitch like tee in your ear, and then it goes away, that's a hair cell that just died. So if you've ever been to a concert and you leave and you like hear a ringing for 2 days, you just did some pretty serious damage to your hearing. So you should probably wear earplugs. As nerdy as that is, it is the safest thing for your long-term aural health. AURAL. Oral, not oral. Okay. Now, one other thing that we're pretty good at is determining where sounds are coming from. And how that works is just like how we see depth with 2 eyes, we have 2 ears. And those ears are located on the sides of our heads, not on the top of our heads, but the sides of our heads. So that means that we're really good at determining which side a sound is coming from. And the way that works is literally just physics. The sound waves hit one ear before they hit the other, which then makes us turn and look to the source of the sound. If something is directly in front of us or directly behind us, right, the ears receive that information at the same time. So that tells us it's right in front or right behind. Notice if your eyes are closed, it's hard to tell if it's right in front or right behind, which I'll show you in class. But if it's, again, not something that's perfectly perpendicular, but more 45 degrees or 30 degrees or something like that, again, it gets to the one ear faster. Your head actually blocks the sound waves from getting to the one ear, so it hears it a slight delay, but enough for you to pick it up. Again, I have a demonstration to do for this that will prove how this works. And all that's really just because sound travels slower than light does. So we can pick that up. Now, animals that this is a cool little fact. So a lot of animals have ears on the side of their head. Some have ears on the top of their head. Think of a rabbit. Animals that have ears on the top of their head usually are animals that are that their predator comes from above, so that they can hear. Kind of think of the same thing. They can hear kind of more of a range of height, whereas animals with the ears on the sides of their head are really good at, most of their predators are probably coming from on the ground, or at least eye level with them. All right, so yes, that's a weird fun fact to end this video on. So next video we'll talk about the other senses: our sense of smell, our sense of taste, our sense of touch, and then some of the other ones that we don't normally talk about: body awareness, kinesthetics, vestibular sense, those things. But that's for the next video, which will be available for you to watch pretty much right away. All right, guys, until then.